Keanu Reeves saw a little boy shivering in the rain. What happened next will shock you. A little boy, alone in the cold, his tiny hands gripping a worn-out toy car. The rain poured, drenching his thin jacket as he waited for someone who might never come. Most people passed by without a second glance, but one man stopped, and that moment changed everything. Los Angeles is a city of lights, wealth, and dreams, but beneath its glittering skyline, loneliness and struggle often go unnoticed. That night, as the rain soaked the streets, a world-famous actor was about to make a decision that would alter the course of a child's life forever. Keanu Reeves, known for his humility and kindness, had no idea that stopping for this one child would lead to something so much bigger. Los Angeles never truly sleeps. The streets pulse with life. Even as the sky darkens and the rain blurs the neon glow of the city, cars honk impatiently, their headlights reflecting in puddles that ripple under hurried footsteps. Office workers rush home, shielding themselves from the downpour with newspapers and briefcases, their conversations drowned out by the endless hum of the metropolis. It was a night like any other, except for one small detail that didn't belong. Amidst the swirling energy of the city, on a quiet stretch of sidewalk, just past a row of dimly lit shops, Keanu Reeves noticed a shadow that seemed too still, too fragile to be a part of the usual city chaos. At first, it was easy to miss. Just a small, curled-up figure huddled against the cold concrete, motionless except for the faint rise and fall of shallow breaths. But as Keanu walked closer, the shape took form beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp. A child, a little boy no older than 6 or 7, sat with his back against the brick wall of a closed storefront. His head was bent low, his damp hair clinging to his forehead, and his arms were wrapped around his knees as if trying to make himself as small as possible, as invisible as the city would allow. He wasn't crying, he wasn't begging. He just sat there, his tiny fingers trembling as they clutched a worn-out toy car, rolling it back and forth across the wet pavement. The car was small, its once bright paint chipped from years of love and wear. It was the kind of toy that might have come from a thrift store, the kind that had seen better days, but was still a child's most treasured possession. The rain soaked through his thin jacket, and with every cold gust of wind, his little shoulders shook. But still, he remained there, waiting. People walked past him, dozens of them. Some glanced his way before quickly looking forward, their minds too occupied with their own lives to wonder why a small boy sat alone on a freezing night. Others didn't look at all, stepping around him as if he were nothing more than another obstacle on the sidewalk. Some even sighed in irritation when they had to adjust their path, as if the child's very presence was an inconvenience, rather than a cause for concern. Keanu stopped walking. Something about this moment gripped him in a way he couldn't ignore. Why was no one stopping? His gut twisted as he watched the boy sit there, shivering, his small hands barely able to hold onto the toy car. It wasn't just the cold that made him tremble. It was the way his eyes darted up toward every car that passed by, full of hope that quickly faded when none of them slowed down. He was waiting for someone who wasn't coming soon enough. Keanu hesitated for only a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. He had no idea that what he was about to do would change 2 lives forever. Keanu knelt down, lowering himself to the boy's eye level so he wouldn't seem intimidating. He kept his voice soft, careful. "Hey there, buddy," he said gently. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy stiffened slightly but didn't move away. Slowly, he lifted his head, and Keanu saw the face of a child who had been battling exhaustion for far too long. His cheeks were flushed red from the cold, his lips slightly chapped, and his eyes, big, uncertain, weary beyond his years. For a moment, he didn't answer. It was as if he were debating whether or not to speak at all. Then, in a voice barely audible over the rain, he mumbled, "I'm waiting for my mom." Keanu felt his heart tighten. "Where is she?" Keanu asked, glancing around. The boy hesitated, then looked down at his toy car again. He rolled it back and forth against the wet sidewalk, as if the motion gave him comfort. "She's working." There was no complaint in his voice, no frustration, just a quiet acceptance that no child should have to carry. "She said she'd be here soon," the boy added. Keanu checked his watch. It was late, too late for a child to be waiting alone on the street. His stomach twisted at the thought of how many nights this boy had done this before. "The rain's really coming down," Keanu said gently. "Do you wait here for her a lot?" The boy gave a small nod. "Yeah, she works late a lot, but I don't mind, I have my car with me." He said it so simply, like it was normal, like it was okay, but Keanu could hear the sadness beneath it, the way he clung to the only thing that brought him comfort, a tiny car that was falling apart, much like the situation he had been forced to grow up in. This wasn't a one-time thing. This child, this little boy, had been waiting alone in the dark, in the cold, for longer than anyone had cared to notice. Keanu's jaw tightened. This wasn't right. He had seen wealth beyond imagination in this city. People who owned entire buildings, who drove cars that cost more than some made in a lifetime. And yet, right in front of him, a little boy had nothing but a toy car and his own resilience. Keanu felt the weight of his own jacket, warm from his body heat, still dry despite the rain. Without thinking twice, he pulled it off and wrapped it around the boy's small shoulders. "You must be freezing," he said softly. The boy stiffened slightly, his small hands gripping the fabric. He didn't push it away, but he touched the material hesitantly, almost as if he wasn't sure he was allowed to accept the kindness. Keanu saw the conflict in his eyes, the way pride and need battled within him. Then, Keanu did something that would change everything. He didn't just offer help, he gave the boy something even more important. The feeling that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Keanu could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him like the thick, rain-soaked air around them. A small boy left alone on a dimly lit sidewalk, drenched, trembling, and yet, not complaining, not crying. He simply endured. The city buzzed around them, indifferent to the child's quiet struggle. Cars sped by, their headlights reflecting in puddles, sending flashes of light across the wet pavement. Umbrella-clutching pedestrians hurried past, their faces hidden behind scarves and collars, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice the boy huddled in the cold. But Keanu noticed, and he couldn't just walk away. He reached into his pocket, feeling the familiar texture of his worn leather wallet. With a quick motion, he pulled out a few bills and extended them toward the boy. "Here," Keanu said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is just to get you something warm while you wait for your mom." The boy froze. His small fingers clutched his toy car tighter, his knuckles turning white. He didn't reach for the money. He didn't even look at it. Instead, he stared down at his lap, his face partially hidden by damp strands of hair. I can't," he murmured, barely above a whisper. Keanu frowned. The boy's reluctance wasn't from shyness, it was something else. "Why not?" Keanu asked, his voice filled with quiet curiosity. The boy straightened up a little, though his tiny shoulders still shook from the cold. He swallowed hard before finally answering. "Mom says we don't take money from strangers," he said, his voice small but firm. "We have to be strong." Keanu wasn't sure what hit him harder, the quiet pride in the boy's voice, or the heartbreaking realization of what it meant. This wasn't just a child waiting in the rain. This was a child who had been forced to grow up too fast, to understand struggles that no 6-year-old should ever have to face. He wasn't just cold, he wasn't just hungry. He was trying to be strong, not for himself, but for his mother. The idea of a boy so young carrying such a burden made Keanu's chest tighten. But he also understood. He knew what it meant to struggle, to feel like you had to carry the weight of the world on your own shoulders. Respecting the boy's stance, Keanu tucked the money back into his pocket. He wouldn't insist. He wouldn't make the child feel small for refusing. But he wasn't about to walk away either. Instead, he lowered himself to the boy's level, offering a small, understanding smile. "All right, no money," he said, "but how about a trade? I get you something warm to eat, and you tell me all about that car of yours." For the first time since they started talking, the boy's expression changed. His wide eyes lit up with curiosity. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding, his lips twitching into the smallest hint of a smile. "Deal." Keanu chuckled softly, standing up and shaking off the cold that had begun to seep into his own clothes. "All right, wait right here." Keanu jogged down the street, his boots splashing through puddles, his breath visible in the cold night air. He had passed a small cafe earlier, a quiet, tucked-away place where the warm glow of the interior spilled out onto the wet sidewalk. As soon as he stepped inside, the scent of fresh coffee and baked bread wrapped around him like a comforting embrace. The heater hummed softly, a stark contrast to the bitter chill outside. Approaching the counter, Keanu ordered a hot sandwich and a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Not scalding, just warm enough for a child's hands to hold without burning. When he returned, the boy was still sitting in the same spot, his tiny hands still rolling the toy car back and forth, back and forth. The moment Keanu handed him the warm bag, the boy hesitated. Keanu smiled. "Remember, it's not charity, it's a gift of friendship." For a second, the boy just stared at him. Then his fingers curled around the warm cup, and he brought it to his lips. He took a careful sip, his small shoulders relaxing as the warmth seeped through his body. A soft hum of delight escaped him. "It's really good," he murmured, taking a larger sip. Keanu sat beside him, watching as he carefully unwrapped the sandwich. He ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was a rare treat, something he wasn't used to having often. Keanu's heart ached. "So," he said, nudging the conversation towards something lighter, "tell me about your car." The boy immediately brightened. "This is my good luck car," he said, holding it up. "It's special. Mom got it for me last year, and she said as long as I have it, I'll never be alone." Keanu felt something tighten in his chest. "That's a pretty amazing car," he said. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "It's the best. It's the only toy I have, but it's all I need." Keanu watched as the boy's fingers traced the worn edges of the toy. The paint was chipped, the wheels slightly loose, but it was clear that this car was everything to him. The rain began to slow, the rhythmic pattering on the pavement softening. The street lights flickered above them, casting a gentle glow on the wet sidewalk. For the first time since Keanu had seen him, the boy looked content, even just for a moment. And then, the moment shattered. A sudden voice pierced through the quiet night. "Ethan!" The boy's entire posture changed, his body tensed, his hands froze mid-motion, his eyes widened, not just with relief, but with a mixture of fear and guilt. Keanu turned. A woman was running toward them, her footsteps splashing through puddles, her breath ragged. Her hair was damp, her clothes simple but worn, and her face filled with panic. The moment she reached them, she collapsed to her knees, pulling the boy into a desperate, almost crushing embrace. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered frantically, pressing kisses against his damp hair. "I got stuck at work, and I ran as fast as I could." Her voice cracked, tears mixed with raindrops on her face. Keanu took a step back, letting them have their moment. But as he watched the woman clutch her child, whispering apologies into his hair, he realized something else. She wasn't just a mother, she was a fighter. A woman pushing herself beyond exhaustion just to keep a roof over their heads. A woman who, despite her best efforts, still felt like she was failing. When she finally looked up, her face shifted from panic to confusion as she noticed Keanu. She wiped her face quickly, embarrassment flickering in her eyes. I'm sorry, did he bother you?" Keanu shook his head. "No, not at all. He's a great kid." The woman exhaled shakily. "He's not supposed to talk to strangers, but I don't blame him. He's alone a lot." Keanu frowned. "Alone?" She hesitated. "I work 2 jobs, she admitted quietly. "I can't afford a babysitter, so he waits for me." Keanu's chest tightened. Something inside him hardened. This wasn't right. And he couldn't just walk away. Keanu looked at the woman. "Maybe I can help." She froze. Hope flickered in her tired eyes. And in that moment, everything began to change. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a misty hush that settled over the city. The wet pavement shimmered under the dim streetlights, and the distant hum of traffic created a rhythmic pulse in the background. The air smelled of damp earth and cooling asphalt, a stark contrast to the warmth Keanu felt growing in his chest. Ethan's mother clutched him tightly, pressing frantic kisses onto his rain-soaked hair. Her hands trembled as she held him close, as if reassuring herself that he was real, that he was safe. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." "Oh," she whispered over and over, her voice breaking under the weight of emotions she had bottled up for far too long. Keanu stood silently, watching the moment unfold. A lump formed in his throat. This wasn't just about a boy waiting in the rain. This was about a mother who was drowning under the weight of survival, trying to do everything right, yet still feeling like she was losing. Even now, as she held her son, he could see the exhaustion etched into every part of her. The dark circles under her eyes, the slump in her shoulders, the slight shake in her hands. This wasn't just tiredness. This was a woman on the edge, and yet she had never stopped fighting. Finally, she looked up at Keanu, her eyes glassy with exhaustion, gratitude, and something else, embarrassment. I don't even know what to say," she stammered, her voice fragile like a piece of glass ready to shatter. She swallowed hard, stealing a glance at Ethan before she continued, barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't have." She hesitated, her throat tightening, then exhaled shakily. "I shouldn't have let him wait out here alone. I didn't have a choice." Her last words had hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. There it was, the guilt, the shame of being a mother who was doing everything she could, yet still feeling like she was failing. But she wasn't failing, she was fighting, and Keanu wasn't going to let her believe otherwise. He shook his head firmly. "You're doing your best, and that's more than enough." Her lips pressed into a thin line and she let out a shaky, bitter laugh. She wiped at her face quickly, as if embarrassed to be seen like this. "I don't feel like it," she admitted. Her voice cracked on the last word. Keanu clenched his jaw. This woman had given everything. She had pushed through sleepless nights, through endless shifts, through impossible decisions, and she still felt like it wasn't enough. Because no matter how hard she worked, her son was still sitting alone in the rain, waiting. Keanu took a step forward. His voice was firm but kind. "Look, I don't know your full situation, and I won't pretend to," he said. "But I do know one thing. No child should have to wait alone in the cold. Her breath hitched slightly, and she looked down at Ethan, whose small hands were still gripping his toy car as if it were a lifeline. "I don't have anyone else," she admitted after a long silence. Her voice was so quiet, so raw. "It's just me. I work 2 jobs to keep us in our apartment. There's never enough time, never enough money." She sighed, her shoulders slumping forward as if the weight of everything she carried had finally become too heavy to hide. Keanu could hear the exhaustion in her voice. But more than that, he could hear something else. Defeat. The kind of defeat that only comes when you have fought so long, so hard, and you still feel like you're losing. Keanu exhaled, the cold air stinging his lungs. He couldn't just walk away. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said softly. The words came before he could second-guess them. The woman frowned, uncertainty flashing across her tired face. "Help?" she echoed, her voice hesitant, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Keanu nodded. "I know people. Good people. Maybe I can help you find a job that pays better. Something that doesn't keep you away from Ethan all night." She stared at him. For the first time that night, her exhaustion was replaced by something else. Hope. It was small, fragile, like a flickering candle that had been extinguished too many times before. She parted her lips as if to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she whispered, "You'd do that?" Keanu smiled, the warmth in his expression unmistakable. "Of course." She let out a shaky breath, as if the weight on her chest had lifted just enough for her to breathe again. Then she turned to Ethan, who had been silent this entire time. He had watched everything, his big, unblinking eyes bouncing between his mother and Keanu, taking in every word. "What do you think, bud?" she asked softly, brushing a damp curl from his forehead. Ethan didn't hesitate. His face broke into a grin, and he hugged his toy car to his chest. "I think Mr. Keanu is like a real-life superhero." Keanu let out a small chuckle, but deep down, something inside him shifted. This wasn't about grand gestures. It wasn't about charity or doing something to be recognized. It was about kindness. It was about the simple act of caring, of stopping for just a moment to see someone, to truly see them. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. And in that moment, Keanu knew this decision, this night, this little act of kindness would change 2 lives forever. A few weeks passed. The crisp winter air still lingered over Los Angeles, weaving through the towering buildings and bustling streets. But for one small family, life had quietly yet profoundly begun to change. Ethan no longer sat on the cold pavement, waiting alone in the dark. No longer did his small figure huddle under the dim glow of streetlights, watching every passing car with hope that sometimes turned into disappointment. His mother no longer raced through the city with panic in her heart, fearing the worst as she turned each corner, praying that Ethan was still safe, still waiting for her. Now she could walk home without the crushing weight of guilt suffocating her. And Keanu had kept his promise. With just a few calls to people he trusted, Keanu had helped Ethan's mother find a stable job, one that paid better, had reasonable hours, and most importantly, allowed her to be home in the evening. No more exhausting double shifts that drained her spirit. No more rushing through crowded streets, knowing her son was alone and helpless. No more impossible choices between survival and being there for her child. For the first time in years, she could breathe. For the first time in years, Ethan had his mother home to tuck him in at night. The change hadn't been overnight, but it had been real, and it had been life-changing. One evening, Keanu stepped out of a quiet cafe, the warm scent of roasted coffee still lingering in his senses. The city hummed softly around him, the streets alive with people going about their lives. Just as he began walking, a familiar, excited voice cut through the night. "Mr. Keanu!" Keanu turned, just in time to see a small blur of motion racing toward him. Ethan. The little boy ran at full speed, his tiny feet barely touching the pavement as he darted through the evening crowd. His face radiated pure joy, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his ever-present toy car clutched tightly in his small hands. When he reached Keanu, he skidded to a stop, panting slightly, but grinning from ear to ear. He held up his toy car triumphantly, his eyes shining with excitement. "Look," Ethan beamed. "My good luck charm worked. You helped my mom." Keanu felt warmth spread through his chest as he crouched down to Ethan's level, his lips curling into an easy smile. "I think your mom did all the hard work," Keanu said, his voice filled with admiration. But Ethan, in the way only children can, shook his head with absolute certainty. "Nope," he grinned. "You helped us when no one else did." Keanu glanced up, his gaze landing on Ethan's mother standing a few feet away. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't breathless. She wasn't weighed down by exhaustion. worry, and guilt. Instead, she stood tall, her face softer, brighter. There were no heavy shadows under her eyes, no tightness in her expression that once betrayed the silent battles she fought daily. She looked lighter, and when she smiled at Keanu, it wasn't a smile filled with obligation or debt. It was genuine gratitude, the kind that comes from knowing that someone had truly seen her, had truly cared. "I can never repay you for what you did," she said, her voice warm, steady, filled with a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. Keanu shook his head. "It's not about that." He reached out and ruffled Ethan's hair, his heart swelling at how much brighter the boy looked compared to the night they had first met. "Sometimes, a little kindness is all it takes to change a life." Ethan beamed even wider, gripping his toy car tighter as if it held all the magic in the world. "You changed too," Keanu chuckled softly, but deep down the weight of those words settled into his heart. As Keanu stood up and walked away, he glanced back one last time. He saw a mother holding her son's hand, not with desperation, not with fear, but with the quiet strength of someone who had finally been given a chance to breathe. He saw a boy who no longer had to wait alone in the cold, because now he had his mother home where she belonged. And he knew their lives had been reshaped, all because of a single decision. A decision to stop, to care, to do something instead of looking away. And that was all the proof he needed. Kindness, no matter how small, is never wasted. And that's the power of a single act of kindness. One moment, one decision. It may seem small, but sometimes it's enough to change a life. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring and emotional stories. Your support means everything. See you in the next one.